What happens when one of television's most beloved late-night hosts comes face-to-face with a guest who refuses to play by the rules? In just 38 seconds, a simple question turned into the most shocking meltdown in talk show history. And what followed was an explosive confrontation that left the studio audience gasping and cameras rolling on a disaster no one saw coming. Seth Meyers sat behind his desk that evening, his signature smile ready for another night of entertaining America. The studio was packed, the energy electric, and everyone was excited for the next guest. When Meghan walked out onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause. She waved, her expression confident, almost regal, as she made her way to the guest chair. "Welcome, welcome. So great to have you here," Seth said warmly, extending his hand for a shake. She took it briefly, barely making eye contact, before settling into her seat and adjusting her dress with an air of importance. "But thank you for having me," she replied, her tone flat, as if she were doing him the favor. Seth, ever the professional, pressed forward with his usual charm. "So, you've been keeping busy. What have you been up to lately?" She tilted her head slightly, a small smile playing at her lips. "Well, Seth, I've been working on projects that actually matter. Things that make a real difference in the world. Not everyone can say that about their work." The audience shifted uncomfortably, and Seth's smile didn't waver, but there was a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "That's great. I think a lot of people try to make a difference in their own ways." "Trying and succeeding are two different things," she cut in, her voice sharp. "I'm sure you understand that." Seth laughed lightly, trying to diffuse the tension. "Well, I do my best. So, tell us about these projects." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with deliberate slowness. "I don't know if your audience would really understand the scope of what I'm doing. It's quite complex. It requires a level of sophistication and global awareness that, let's be honest, most people just don't have." The studio went quiet. You could hear the uncomfortable silence spreading through the rows of seats. Seth maintained his composure, his professionalism shining through. "I think you might be surprised. Our audience is pretty smart." "Are they?" she asked. See, her eyebrow raised in challenge. She glanced around the studio with a look that could only be described as condescending. "I mean, they watch late-night television. How intellectually curious can they really be?" A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Seth's expression tightened, but he kept his cool. "I think that's a pretty unfair assessment. People watch because they want to laugh, unwind, and yes, learn something new. We cover important topics here." She waved her hand dismissively. "You cover what your network tells you to cover. You read from a script. I operate in the real world, Seth, where actual change happens. Not in some studio with cue cards and a laugh track." "We don't have a laugh track," Seth replied, his voice still kind, but firmer now. "And I think you'd be surprised at how much thought goes into what we do here." "Thought?" she scoffed, leaning forward. "You think telling jokes about politicians is thought? You think making silly faces and doing impressions is contributing to society? Please, what I do changes lives. What you do wastes time." The audience was completely silent now, every eye locked on the stage. Seth took a breath, his hands folded calmly on his desk. "I respect that you're passionate about your work, but I don't think it's fair to diminish what other people do. Entertainment has value. It brings people together. It provides relief during hard times." "Relief," she repeated mockingly. "That's one way to justify it, I suppose. But let's be honest about what this really is. This is a vanity project for you. You get to sit here, in your comfortable chair, making your comfortable salary, pretending you're relevant. Meanwhile, people like me are out there doing the hard work." Seth's jaw tightened. "I think there are a lot of people who would disagree with that characterization." "Of course they would," she said with a bitter laugh. "People love their distractions. They love anything that keeps them from thinking too hard about the real problems in the world. And you give them exactly that. Distraction, noise, nothing of substance. I think we've had some pretty substantial conversations on this show, Seth countered, his patience clearly wearing thin, but his tone still controlled. We've talked about important issues, brought attention to causes that matter. She rolled her eyes dramatically. Bringing attention? By what? Making a joke about it? That's not activism, Seth. That's performance. And frankly, it's insulting to those of us who actually put ourselves on the line. I'm not trying to compete with you, Seth said evenly. I'm just trying to do my job, which is to entertain and inform. I'm sorry if you don't see value in that. I don't, she stated bluntly. I really don't. And I think it's time someone said it. This whole industry, this whole late-night talk show circus, it's outdated. It's irrelevant. You're irrelevant. The audience gasped audibly. A few people started murmuring to each other. Seth sat back in his chair, his expression calm, but his eyes showing the hurt from such a direct attack. That's pretty harsh. It's honest, she shot back. And honestly, I'm surprised you can't see it yourself. Look around, Seth. The world is changing. People don't need this anymore. They don't need you. Seth took a deep breath, composing himself with remarkable grace. Well, I appreciate your honesty, even if I completely disagree with it. But I think maybe we should move on to another topic. Why? She challenged. Because you can't handle the truth? Because it's uncomfortable for you to hear that what you do doesn't matter? No, Seth said firmly, his voice still steady. Because I invited you here as a guest, and guests typically show a basic level of respect. I've been nothing but kind to you since you walked out here, and you've done nothing but insult me, my work, and my audience. She laughed, a cold, sharp sound. Oh, here we go. The host gets his feelings hurt, and suddenly I'm the bad guy. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't handle any real criticism. You live in this bubble where everyone tells you how great you are. Criticism is fine, Seth replied, his voice getting stronger. But what you're doing isn't criticism. It's just being mean. There's a difference. Mean? She repeated incredulously. I'm being honest. If you can't handle honesty, maybe you're in the wrong business. I can handle honesty just fine, Seth said, his composure impressive given the circumstances. What I can't handle is someone coming onto my show and treating everyone here with such disrespect. My staff worked hard to have you here. My audience came to have a good time. And you're sitting here telling them they're not sophisticated enough to understand you. She stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. I don't have to sit here and be lectured by you. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I've done? I know exactly who you are, Seth said, remaining seated, his voice calm. And right now, you're someone who's being incredibly rude. Rude? She spat. You want to talk about rude? How about inviting someone on your show and then attacking them when they speak their truth? I haven't attacked you once, Seth said, his voice still measured. I've tried to have a conversation. You're the one who came out here with an agenda. An agenda? She laughed bitterly. My agenda is to stop pretending that what you do matters. My agenda is to call out the emptiness of this whole charade. Then why did you agree to come on the show? Seth asked. A fair question that hung in the air. She paused, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for an answer. I thought maybe you'd be different. I thought maybe you'd actually want to have a real conversation. I did want that, Seth said quietly. But a real conversation requires two people who respect each other, and you've made it pretty clear that you don't respect me, or anyone here. Because you don't deserve it, she shouted, her voice echoing through the studio, and the audience collectively inhaled. You sit here in your ivory tower, making millions, contributing nothing, and you expect people to bow down and worship you. Well, I won't. I refuse. Seth stood up now, his face serious, but his voice still controlled. Nobody asked you to worship anyone. We asked you to be a guest. To have a conversation. To be civil. Civil, she muttered, shaking her head. Always with the civility. That's what people like you hide behind when you don't want to face the truth. The truth is that you've been hostile from the moment you sat down, Seth said, his patience clearly at its end. I've tried to be gracious. I've tried to keep this on track. But you seem determined to make this as difficult as possible. Difficult? She said, her voice dripping with condescension. You think honest conversation is difficult? Maybe that says more about you than it does about me. Seth leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. Honest conversation involves listening, not just talking at people. It involves respect, which you haven't shown once. I don't owe you respect, she snapped. Respect is earned, and quite frankly, I don't see anything here worth respecting. Then I have to ask again, Seth said, his voice incredibly patient despite everything. Why did you come here? What did you hope to accomplish? She hesitated, and for a brief moment, something flickered across her face. Uncertainty, perhaps, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. I came here because I thought you might actually listen. I thought you might be willing to have a real conversation about real issues. I am willing, Seth replied gently. But that's not what you're doing. You're not having a conversation. You're giving a lecture, and not a very kind one. Kind, she repeated with a bitter laugh. Everyone's so obsessed with being kind. What about being truthful? What about being real? You can be both, Seth said simply. Truth doesn't have to be cruel. You can be honest without being hurtful. Says the man who makes a living off sarcasm and mockery, she countered. There's a difference between satire and personal attacks, Seth explained, still maintaining his composure. We mock ideas, policies, public actions. We don't mock people for existing. We don't attack guests on our show. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please, spare me the moral superiority. You're not better than anyone else just because you smile while you do it. I never said I was better than anyone, Seth replied. I'm just trying to do my job with some level of decency. Is that really so offensive to you? Difficult, she said, her voice rising again. You think I'm difficult because I won't play your little game? Because I won't smile and laugh at your jokes and pretend like this matters? I think you're difficult because you're being disrespectful, Seth stated plainly. To me, to my team, to everyone watching. She grabbed her purse from beside the chair, her movements sharp and angry. I don't need this. I don't need to sit here and be told how to behave by someone who makes a living telling jokes. Then maybe you should leave, Seth said, his voice quiet but firm. The studio went completely silent. Every person in that room held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. She stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. What did you just say to me? I said maybe you should leave, Seth repeated, standing his ground. If you're this unhappy being here, if you think so little of what we do, then there's no point in continuing this. Her face turned red, her hands gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles went white. You're kicking me off your show. I'm giving you an option, Seth clarified. You can stay, and we can try to have a respectful conversation, or you can go. But I'm not going to sit here and let you berate everyone. She laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. This is unbelievable. Do you know how many shows would kill to have me as a guest? Then go be on one of those shows, Seth said simply. But if you stay here, you need to show some basic human decency. Human decency? She repeated, on her voice dripping with sarcasm. Coming from you. That's rich. What's that supposed to mean? Seth asked, his brow furrowing. It means you're a hypocrite, she declared loudly. You stand here acting all high and mighty, but you're just as fake as everyone else in this industry. You pretend to care about people, but really you only care about ratings and money. That's not true, Seth said, his voice firm but not angry. I genuinely care about making a show that people enjoy. And that's not fake. That's my job. Your job, she sneered. Your precious job. Well, excuse me for not being impressed by your job, Seth. Excuse me for thinking that maybe, just maybe, there are more important things in the world than late-night television. Nobody's saying there aren't, Seth replied, his patience truly remarkable at this point. But that doesn't give you the right to come here and act like this. She turned to face the audience, spreading her arms wide. Is this what you all want? You want to sit here and watch this man pretend he's doing something meaningful? You want to applaud him for reading jokes that other people wrote? The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure how to react. A few people looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Seth's voice cut through the tension. Leave them out of this. They came here to have a good time, not to be put on the spot by you. She whirled back around to face him. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I ruining the fun? Am I bringing too much reality into your fantasy world? You're being cruel, Seth said simply. That's what you're doing. Cruel? She laughed. You want to talk about cruel? How about building a career on making fun of people? How about that? We make fun of powerful people who can take it, Seth countered. Politicians, celebrities who put themselves out there. We don't punch down. And we certainly don't invite guests on just to humiliate them. But you'll humiliate me by kicking me off? She challenged. You're humiliating yourself, Seth said quietly, and those words seemed to hit harder than anything else he'd said. Her face contorted with rage. How dare you? How dare you speak to me like that? How dare you come onto my show and treat everyone like garbage? Seth shot back, his voice rising slightly for the first time. I welcomed you. I was excited to talk to you, and you've done nothing but attack me since you got here. Because you deserve it, she yelled. You and everyone like you, sitting in your comfortable studios, acting like you're so important when you contribute nothing to society. I contribute joy, Seth said, his voice strong and clear. I contribute laughter. I contribute a place where people can come and forget about their problems for an hour. And you know what? That matters. Maybe not to you, but it matters to a lot of people. She shook her head violently. That's pathetic. That's the most pathetic thing I've ever heard. Then why are you still here? Seth asked pointedly. If this is so beneath you, if I'm so pathetic, why are you still standing on my stage? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Her eyes darted around the studio, looking for support that wasn't coming. The audience stared back at her in uncomfortable silence. I'm leaving, she finally announced, her voice shaking with anger. I'm leaving because I have better things to do than waste my time with someone like you. That's your choice, Seth said calmly, sitting back down at his desk. The door's right there. She stood there for a moment, as if expecting him to stop her, to apologize, to beg her to stay. When he simply looked at her with a calm, patient expression, she let out a frustrated noise and turned toward the exit. You'll regret this, she called back over her shoulder. You'll regret treating me this way. I don't think I will, Seth replied evenly. Take care. She stormed off the stage, her heels clicking loudly against the floor. The sound echoed through the silent studio as everyone watched her go. A door slammed somewhere backstage, the sound making several audience members jump. Seth sat at his desk, taking a deep breath and running his hand through his hair. He looked out at the audience, who were still sitting in shocked silence, and gave them a small, apologetic smile. Well, he said softly, that was unexpected. The audience erupted, not in applause at first, but in a collective exhale, as if everyone had been holding their breath. Then, the applause started, building and building, until the entire studio was on its feet, cheering for Seth. He held up his hands, looking genuinely touched, but also a bit embarrassed. Thank you, but that's not necessary. I tried my best to keep that civil. The applause continued, louder now, mixed with a few supportive shouts from the audience. I want to apologize, Seth continued, once the noise died down enough for him to be heard. I never want anyone to have a bad experience at our show. Not you guys, not my guests, nobody. But I also believe in treating people with respect, and I expect the same in return. More applause, this time mixed with calls of agreement. We still have a show to do, Seth said. Is his smile returning? And I promise you, the rest of the night will be much more fun. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll get things back on track. The band started playing as they cut to commercial. Seth leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. Members of his staff rushed onto the stage, checking on him, making sure he was okay. I'm fine, he assured them, his voice tired but steady. That was just intense. One of his producers patted him on the shoulder. You handled that perfectly. Seriously, you were a complete professional. Seth nodded, but you could see the weight of what had just happened settling on him. It's never easy to have a confrontation like that, especially in front of a live studio audience and television cameras. But he had stood his ground without losing his temper, without being cruel in return, without stooping to her level. As the commercial break ended and the show prepared to resume, Seth straightened his tie. Dean took a sip of water and put his professional smile back on. The show must go on, as they say, and he was determined to make sure the rest of the evening went smoothly. The audience settled back into their seats, still buzzing with energy from what they had just witnessed. There was a sense of solidarity in the room now, a feeling that they had all been through something together and had come out the other side. Seth looked into the camera as the lights came back up, his expression warm and welcoming once again. Welcome back, everybody. I think we could all use something a little lighter right now. The audience laughed, a genuine, relieved laughter that filled the studio with warmth. Let's talk about something fun, Seth continued, seamlessly transitioning into the next segment, as if the previous disaster had never happened. And that, perhaps, was the most impressive thing of all. His ability to bounce back, to not let the negativity derail the entire show, to remember that there were hundreds of people in that studio and millions watching at home who deserved a good experience. Throughout the rest of the show, Seth never mentioned what had happened again. He didn't make jokes about it, didn't reference it, didn't use it for material. He simply moved forward, proving that sometimes the most professional thing you can do is know when to leave something behind and focus on what matters. The audience responded to his grace with enthusiasm, laughing harder at his jokes, engaging more with the next guests, creating an atmosphere of support and appreciation that filled the studio. They had seen him tested, and they had seen him pass that test with flying colors. Behind the scenes, word of the confrontation was already spreading. Staff members who hadn't been in the studio were getting text messages from friends who had been there. Clips would eventually make their way online, though that wasn't something anyone was thinking about in the moment. What mattered right then was that Seth had maintained his integrity. He had set a boundary without being aggressive. He had defended himself and his work without attacking back. He had shown that it's possible to stand up for yourself while still being kind. As the show wound down and Seth delivered his closing remarks, there was a sense of pride in that studio. Pride in a host who had handled an impossible situation with grace. Pride in an audience that had supported him through it. Pride in a show that valued respect and decency above all else. When the cameras finally stopped rolling and the audience filed out, many of them lingered, wanting to tell Seth personally how much they appreciated what he had done. He took the time to thank them, to shake hands, to take photos, never once acting like what had happened was a big deal. But it was a big deal. It was a moment that would be talked about for a long time. A moment that showed what happens when someone tries to use their platform to tear others down, and what happens when someone refuses to let that negativity win. Seth Meyers had done what he does best that night. He had entertained, yes, but more importantly, he had shown what it means to be professional, to be kind, and to have the courage to say enough is enough when someone crosses a line.